I'm recording this video with permission from Scholastic. So, welcome back guys. The last chapter that we read of Frindle was chapter 11, and it was a really short chapter if you remember, and it was all about the article that Judy Morgan, the reporter, published about Lincoln Elementary School. And so at the end we learned that Nick had actually submitted the class 5th grade picture of everybody holding up the Frindles and saying the word Frindle, and he had given it to the reporters so that she could use it. And so no one can figure out how the reporter got the picture, and Nick is holding on to the sneaky secret knowing it was him. So I'm kind of curious to see what happens. So I want you to stop and make a prediction. Do you think Nick's gonna get in trouble? Do you think anyone will find out that it was Nick? I mean, it's kind of unlikely. He's just a 5th grader. But you don't want to underestimate you guys because you guys are very clever, and so is Nick. So let's see what happens. We're gonna be reading chapter 12, which is called Airwaves. Within a week after the article was published in the Westfield Gazette, the kids at the junior high and the kids at the high school had stopped using the word pen and had started using the word Frindle. They loved it. Nick became sort of a hero for kids all over town, and he quickly learned that being a hero, even if you're only a local hero, isn't a free ride. It has a price. People noticed Nick when he walked into his dad's hardware store, or when he stood in line at Penny Pantry to buy a candy bar. He could feel it when somebody recognized him, and it made him feel shy and awkward. Kids at school started expecting him to be clever and funny all the time, and even for a kid as smart as Nick, that was asking a lot. Every teacher, the office secretary, the principal, even the school nurse and the custodian all seemed to be watching. Always watching. His parents were great about everything. True, his mom had been upset when the article first came out, and so had his dad. Nick had said, "But I didn't do anything wrong, Mom, and neither did that lady from the newspaper." And his parents could see that he was right. The things in the article were true, and the truth is the truth, and nothing could be done about that now. Even though it made them uncomfortable to have their boy talked about all over town, secretly, Nick's mom and dad were pleased. After all, a brand new word is a pretty amazing thing. Their Nicholas was quite a fellow. No getting around it. Someone else in town thought the brand new word was pretty amazing too. Bud Lawrence had lived all his life in Westfield, and when he was only 19 years old, he had saved enough money to make an investment. He looked around for a good idea, and then bought the first Dairy Queen in the state. After a few years, he bought the McDonald's restaurant, and that was almost 30 years ago, and these two restaurants had made him rich, one of Westfield's leading citizens. When Bud Lawrence saw the article about the new word, he had his lawyer file a preliminary trademark claim on the word Frindle. Within 4 days, he had set up a small company that was selling cheap plastic ballpoint pens specifically imprinted with the word Frindle. He sold 3,000 Frindles in the first week, and they were sold so fast that stores all over Westfield couldn't keep them in stock. Then just as quickly, kids stopped asking for Frindles. The sales slowed down, and Bud Lawrence started thinking about other projects. A week later, it was Halloween. The leaves started falling, and it seemed like the town was going to quiet down. And it would have, if it hadn't been for Alice Lunderson. Alice lived in Betherly, a town 7 miles away from Westfield, and she worked part-time for the local CBS TV station in Carrington, a town about 75,000 people. When there was important area news, disasters like floods or tornadoes, or sometimes if she came across little stories that seemed cute or original, Alice would call the station news manager in Carrington. If it was a good story, or if it was a day when not much else was happening in the world, then the TV station would send out a van with a camera crew to shoot some videotape. Alice subscribed to all the small town newspapers in the area to keep up with local events. Most of them were published on Thursday, and they arrived at her house by Monday or Tuesday. Then it took her a day or so to look through all of them. On Wednesday morning, she finally saw the article about the Westfield Gazette, about the word war. She read it through twice and looked carefully at the class photograph. She was sure that this story was a winner. The TV station manager in Carrington agreed with her. He called the CBS station in Boston because sometimes Boston picked up stories from the Carrington newsroom. The woman in Boston thought the story had a real zip to it, So she called the network news editor in New York. This is crazy that this kid in a small town is now, his word is ending up in New York. This is crazy. Let's see what happens. When the facts of the Westfield Gazette article got to New York, the staff there loved it. They looked over the schedule sheet for the week and decided it would be a perfect closing story for the CBS Evening News for the next day, Thursday. Orders flew back through the telephone links from New York to Boston to Carrington to Betherly. By Wednesday at noon, Alice had a go order to take the story all the way. It was her first piece to get onto the national news, and 20 million viewers would see it. Alice Lunderson and our camera crew stood on Miss Granger's front porch Wednesday after school. Miss Granger was not impressed at all by the lights and the microphones. She looked right into the camera and said, "I have always said that the dictionary is the finest tool ever made for educating young minds, and I still say that. Children need to understand that there are rules about words and language, and those words have a history that makes sense. And to pretend that a perfectly good English word can be replaced by a silly made-up word just for the fun of it, well, it's not something I was ready to stand by and watch without a fight." "And have you lost that fight, Miss Granger?" asked the reporter. Mrs. Granger turned her eyes up to nearly full power as she looked into the camera with a pale smile and said, "It's not over yet." When Alice and the crew showed up at Nick's house, and the Allen family was ready for them, Mom and Dad sat on the couch with Nick between them. Nick squinted into the lights. His mom had worked out with Nick what he could say and what he couldn't say. "You remember, young man," she had told him as she combed his hair, "these reporters are just looking for a quick story that will make some excitement. But you have to stay here and live in this town, so mind your P's and Q's." Sometimes when people say mind your P's and Q's, she's basically just giving him advice like, hey, watch what you say, because it might make a good news story, but you do have to live here, and if you say something bad, other people are going to maybe look at you a little bit differently. So she's kind of warning Nick that be careful what he says on TV. "So tell me, Nick, why did you make up the new word frindle?" asked Alice Lunderson. Nick gulped and said, "Well, my teacher, Miss Granger, said that all words in the dictionary were made up by people, and that they mean what they mean because we say they do. So I thought it would be fun just to make up a new word and see if that was true." "And were you surprised when Miss Granger got mad about that?" asked Alice with a smile. There was a push on Nick's foot, and his mother said, "We never felt that Miss Granger got angry. When everyone started using the word frindle, it just got to be a disruption, that's all. She's really a very fine teacher." "Yeah," said Nick. "I mean, I learned a lot and about a lot of words, and without her, I wouldn't have." "So what's next for you in the new word?" Alice was wrapping it up. She could see that Nick and his parents were not going to be pushed into saying anything controversial. So she just kept it light and happy. "Well," said Nick, "the funny thing is, even though I invented it, it's not my word anymore. Frindle belongs to everyone now, and I guess everyone will figure out what happens together." Alice also had a short chat with a worried-looking Mrs. Chatham and a smiling Bud Lawrence, maker of the official frindle. Then she shot her opening bit and her closing bit, and the camera crew drove back to Carrington to edit all the pieces and put them together into a 2-minute news story.